I hope all of you had a good holiday for those who were celebrating the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, the New Year's holiday, and that um, your week this week is also going well. As I wrote in an email to all of you, these next few weeks are going to be a bit complicated because of the Jewish holidays. We have a little bit of a respite this week with a full week, but then Friday night and Saturday is Yom Kippur. Then the following week, the Jewish holidays intervene with Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday, Saturday are holidays. The following week, the same stuff. But we really can't afford to get behind in the class, so I posted the next few weeks, the next 2 weeks, and maybe I'll put on the other week as well, following, so that you can begin to do the reading. If you don't post to every single discussion, that's okay too. Let's just try to keep the momentum going as we look at the book of Genesis. So we're doing the beginning part. The next lesson will be on the rest of the book of Genesis, the following lesson on Exodus, and then we'll be moving out into the book of Joshua, Deuteronomy, Joshua, and later on into Samuel, Kings, and so on, because I really want you to get this general picture of the stories and methodologies, strategies of reading, and each of these sets of stories from the books and so on really allows us to think about different ways of reading these sacred texts. The material I gave you to read from Martin Jaffe's book also helps us think about what does it mean to read sacred scriptures? What does it mean to read these sacred texts? How do we go about looking at them? What kinds of ways do we think are the right ways to go? In the comments that you've been writing for me in the postings, many of you have studied Tanakh, many of you have studied Bible in the past, and have made use of traditional ways of reading as well as modern ways of reading and so on. What I'm really asking you here now is to think about examining these different ways and thinking about them in sort of different categories as you look at historical critical, as you look at more traditional ways of finding moral and ethical, religious values in these texts, looking at that in terms of some of the feminist questions, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, and historical critical as well. All of these strategies, from my perspective, are complementary and they're not oppositional. But again, from my perspective, the baseline has got to be the historical critical. From there, you can move forward and do lots of things. But if you only have a kind of moral, ethical picture, if you only are using it for writing sermons or finding how you should live your life and so on, and there's no grounding for even engaging in the study, because what is the Hebrew language doing there? How do the words mean? What do they mean? We have to have a baseline from which to move forward. So that's really my approach here, along with some other things we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. In your responses to the three kinds of issues that I raised in the discussions, very interesting and insightful responses. We'll go maybe one by one. The first was materials from Carol Meyer's book, and if you had a chance to read the Esther Fuchs essay, with feminist readings of these materials. My sense is, with all of this, is that when you all of a sudden decide to look at a text from a different perspective, it opens up so many interesting possibilities, because you're focusing on something which you had not really focused on before. And this can happen with any text, any literature, anything you're looking at. All of a sudden now you're going to look at something different. So, for example, are we looking at feminist? If we looked at only the family relations that occur in the book of Genesis, you can just sort of look at that independently of anything else. Brothers, sisters, father, mother, child, all of that kind of thing, and just write something based on, or think about based on that will give you a very interesting way to think about things. The feminist also says, let's look at this material and think about it from the perspective and focus on how the women are dealt with, what the women do, how the narrator engages the whole question of women, the female, gender, all of this, and what will emerge from that. And I think that the Carol Myers essay opens it up for us a little bit when we think about this. And I thought that her basic point about Adam, as I wrote, I thought it was brilliant. Actually, she wasn't the one who came up with this idea. It was Phyllis Tribble, some years earlier, but Carol Myers does extend it. And her whole book is a much wider look at how women are treated in the ancient Near East in general, what kinds of roles they had, what kinds of roles they had in the family, what kinds of roles they had in the economy and agriculture and so forth. But in this case, she opened up this possibility that the word Adam does not mean man. The word Adam simply means human being or person, or as Everett Fox said, earthling, from the word Adamah. And it's only in the second story of creation, where Adam is found, and where you have this idea of Eve coming from the rib of Adam, that one can look at it a little bit differently and think about Eve, that Adam is this neutral kind of earthling, and male and female are generated when the woman is taken from, and the word tsela there could well mean the side. It doesn't really have to mean rib. And essentially you have new beings, two new beings, Ish and Isha. Originally they were called Adam, and his name, the name of the Ish is going to be Adam. The name of the woman is going to be Chava or Eve. But the gender now becomes a new gender. Adam is Ish, and now the Isha is Chava. And that seems to me to work very in an interesting way. As we look through the rest of the book of Genesis, we'll talk a little bit about it in the next lesson. It's fascinating to see how women are portrayed there. The book of Genesis has probably, the women play a more central role in the book of Genesis probably than any other book in the Bible, and hopefully we'll have a chance to look at that too. The question of Eve's relationship to evil and sin and so on. In the Bible, it's not so obvious, although she's the one that gets sort of seduced by the serpent, and she gives the apple to Adam. But it really gets developed much later. The Bible is much less misogynistic, actually, than rabbinic literature that comes later, and we will take a look at that. I want to just move quickly on to the other two questions. The second set of questions was about Sperling's essay. I hope you had a chance to look at it. I got a note from, I think, Michelle saying that the quality of the reproduction wasn't so good. I hope that you still were able to read the essay. One of the things that I think is so important with this essay is that often when the Bible is studied, particularly in a religious school environment, there seems to be a need to show how the Bible is the best. The Bible is better. We had other things going on in the ancient Near East, but we can see the superiority of the biblical material. It's monotheism, it's ethical stuff, it's this, that, all kinds of things. And some of those do demonstrate some distinctive characteristics of the biblical material. But still, the way that this material gets taught in in the context even of historical-critical, is to show how much better the biblical material is over what was going on in the ancient Near East. That might be called the triumphalist approach, and I know a lot of people who still try to make use of that, and I would really want to oppose that. I would want to fight against that view, that our values today are our values today. Were they the same values 1,000 years ago, 2,000? We like certain things that we see. We don't like other things that we see in the biblical material. And we make an effort to focus on those things we like and perhaps not focus on the things we don't like. The same thing might be true with ancient Near Eastern stories. But the fact is that as we look at the ancient Near Eastern stories, there's some that reflect perhaps some more of our values, some that don't reflect our values. And what do we do with those stories in the Bible that don't reflect our values? We're going to throw them out. We're going to censor them. We're going to try to reread them so that they now, to distort them, and so that somehow now they do reflect our own understanding. I think that's probably, obviously, not the right way to go. We want to understand this in the historical critical mode, to understand that the biblical stories, the book of Genesis and Exodus, Leviticus, and so on, came out of a certain context. And they're not unified. They're not monolithic. There's all different kind of different pictures of God. The picture of God, image of God in the first story of creation is not exactly the same as the image of God in the second story of creation. And the image of God's relationship to human beings and the sense of that shifts over the course of time. So one of the reasons I had you read the Noah and the Utnapishtim story, as I've said, it's pretty obvious, and you finally picked up on that Utnapishtim is a kind of conniving guy. He doesn't follow, he's not obedient the way Noah is, that's for sure. He's told not to take any money. He's told not to take a captain. He's told not to do, and he says, I'm going to do this anyway because it's pretty scary what's going to go on. And maybe I'll need the money. Who knows if all of this is exactly true. So Noah is really obedient. That value he is absolutely 100% on board with. But there might be other things that the Midrash later picks up on, which is he doesn't seem to care about anybody else. Bill Cosby, in his famous record on Noah and the flood, talks about this too. And the question is, how do we deal with this? How do we think about it? He's absolutely obedient, but why doesn't he tell other people that a flood is coming? Why doesn't he try to recruit people? When the flood is over, Utnapishtim looks out and is totally forlorn and cries and so on. When he sees the utter devastation, what does Noah do? He gets out, plants a vineyard so he can get drunk later, and he also offers a sacrifice to God. So in certain ways, the Noah figure is interesting, asserts a certain value, but in other ways, he doesn't assert some of the other values that we would that we think are important, that Utnapishtim does as well. And that really engages both the second and the third of the discussion questions. I think that as we look at things from this historical critical strategy, methodology, what was going on in the ancient Near East at the same time? How did these stories, how does this material connect to what was going on in the ancient Near East? Does it have to be superior? Does it have to be better? Does it have to be absolutely unique for it to be sacred, for it to be our story, for it to be somehow divine? And my position would be not at all. That there is something about these stories that are special and distinctive and unique because they are the special stories of the Jewish people and of other groups too, Christians and Muslims later on, who valued these stories too. But that we don't have to denigrate the other countries, the other groups, at the same time as we represent these stories as our own. So this is sort of my take on this. I don't usually get so, what should I say? I don't usually get so specific and in an advocacy role about how I think about these materials. But in this case, I think it really does have important implications for the way we think about the biblical text and the way we teach the biblical text. It's okay to, from my perspective, it's okay to be proud and to talk about the wonderful things we find in there as we find them, either through historical critical or through other strategies. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that we have to be denigrating other traditions, other things from that period or from periods later on. So I hope you have a good week. For those who are celebrating Yom Kippur, Gemar Chatima Tova, that all of us, whether you're celebrating Yom Kippur or not, should be inscribed in the Book of Life for this coming year. And I'll be back recording another summary next week. Also, we'll be holding office hours this week, probably on Wednesday afternoon, just in a couple of days. But we still don't have all of the responses yet. I'll get back to you by email with specifics about that, and also how to deal with the with the Google Plus Hangout. Good night.